Hello, and welcome to the official podcast of CallUponTheLord.com. My name is Corey Wheaton, and this is week 7 of The Great Story. This week we'll be covering the book of Joshua, mainly focusing on the battles that took place as Joshua and the people of Israel entered into the Promised Land. Now, we're only going to be covering about the first 10 or 12 chapters in the book of Joshua, because that's where all the battles actually take place. The last half of the book of Joshua really discusses how the tribes settled, what land that they were allotted in the Promised Land. So we're not going to get bogged down in all that and in their locations and such. That we can do that another time. We're really just looking at how the Lord worked through them to give them the land that He had promised. We will kind of skip over the land distribution section and hit the last parts of the book of Joshua as it discusses a little bit about how Joshua left the children of Israel. He kind of gave them some instructions before he died. So that's the direction we're going to take today. So let's go ahead and get started with that. If you are interested, the study guide that I teach from will be available on CallUponTheLord.com. It's under the Bible study section, Corey Wigington, The Great Story. Make sure to go and like us on Facebook. We're at facebook.com/CallUponTheLord. We also have a Twitter account, twitter.com/CallUponTheLord. And, of course, our YouTube channel is Call Upon the Lord Video. You can find us by either searching that or searching Corey Wigington as the Bible teacher. I'm searchable, so... All right, let's go ahead and get started with Joshua then. So as we know from last week, Joshua was the appointed leader of Israel after Moses died. Before Moses died, in front of the entire congregation of Israel and in front of Eleazar, the high priest, he laid his hands on Joshua and said, this is the new leader. When I die, Joshua will take over. And he did that in front of the entire congregation to make certain that everyone knew Joshua was going to be the one that the Lord had appointed to lead. That way we didn't have any type of usurpers coming in and trying to take over. Wanted to make sure that everyone knew this is your new leader. Moses conferred leadership upon him. So Joshua, of course, was one of the spies, one of the 12 spies that was sent into the land of Canaan. Him, along with Caleb, were the only two people that came back and said, the Lord has given us this great land, we should just go in there and take it. He was one of the only two people that really believed that the Lord would fulfill His promise. As such, he was spared the 40 years of... well, I guess he was part of the 40 years of the wilderness that the Israelites had to endure, but he was allowed to enter the Promised Land because he kept his faith in God. So, what we see here is Moses dies at the in the last section that we talked about. Moses died, and now Joshua is the leader. And as soon as Moses dies, the Lord comes to Joshua and says, okay, it's time to take my people into the Promised Land now. So, Joshua, being the good leader that he is, he decides, okay, we need to scout this area out. Just like he had been a spy previously and gone in and scouted the area, before he went in and actually took the people of Israel into the Promised Land, he wanted to see what they were getting into so he could plan appropriately, just like a good leader should. So he assigned 2 people to go and scout out the city of Jericho. So it says that Joshua sent 2 men. He probably did this in secret because he didn't want the surrounding nations to know, for one. Probably didn't want his own people to know either, because you remember what happened the last time spies went out. 10 of them came back and said, oh, there's giants in that land over there, and we can't do anything against them. And they spent 40 years wandering the wilderness. He probably didn't want another episode like that. So he sent these guys out in secret just to spy out the city of Jericho, kind of determine its weaknesses, how many men were there, what kind of resistance that they could expect to see. So Spies end up going to Jericho, scouting out the city, and they end up in a prostitute's house by the name of Rahab. Now, likely they didn't know it was a prostitute's house. They probably weren't frequenting the establishment. But it was a good strategic place for them to stay because it was right along the wall. So if they wanted to escape at any time, they were right there along the wall. It actually had a window on the wall, so if they needed to get out of the city, they could get out of the city. So, unfortunately, the spies of Israel weren't that great, because the king of Jericho found out that there were spies in the city. And matter of fact, he actually knew where the spies were staying. So he actually the king sends people to Rahab's house to go get the spies. Now, Rahab, to her credit, she believed in God, or the Israelites' God. She probably wasn't a follower at this time, but she understood that the Israelites had a God, and he was very powerful, and he had given them the land, and that Jericho was in the way. So she understood that God was coming through, and she needed to get out of the way. So when the king's men came to her door and asked where the spies were, she says, well, they were here, but they left before the city gates closed. If you leave now, you can probably catch them. So she kind of hid the spies. It says she hid them among the stalks of flax on her roof. And my understanding is basically they would stack these bundles of flax on the roof and to dry them up there. And they would basically gather the stalks into bundles and then just stack them up there. Bundles were, I think, 3 to 4 feet high. So the men actually were hiding among those bundles of flax. So let's go ahead and read Joshua 2, 9 through 14. Get an idea what's going on here. It says, and she said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and to Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord, that as I have dealt kindly with you, you will also deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign, that you will save alive my father and mother and my brothers and sisters and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. And the men said to her, Our life for yours, even to death. If you do not tell this business of ours, then when the Lord gives us this land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. So what happened here is, after Rahab saves their lives, she strikes a bargain with them and says, look, I have saved your lives. I understand your God is God. Please deal kindly with me and my family and my father's house. And accordingly, the spy said, because you've done this, we will save your life, as long as you don't tell anybody what we're about to do. So I'm going to skip down here to Joshua 2:18, just kind of sum that up. It says, Behold, when we come into the land, you shall tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down. And you shall gather into your house your father and your mother, your brothers, and all your father's household. Then if anyone goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be guiltless. But if a hand is laid on anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head. So what they basically said there is, when we come, hang this scarlet thread outside, scarlet cord outside your window, so we know where your house is. Because like I said, the way her house was situated, it was butted up against the city wall, and she actually had a window along the wall. So she was able to let the spies out of the city. But when they came back, they wanted to make sure they knew exactly which window was hers, so that she was supposed to hang this scarlet cord out of her window. There's a lot of symbolism there. Scarlet cord. A lot of commentators will look at that as being the blood of Christ. Scarlet cord, of course, being red and blood of Christ, and how it saves. Other commentators will talk about the Passover, where they put the blood on the top of the door and then on the sides, and then the angel of death passed over and didn't kill anyone inside. Either way you look at it, there is a lot of symbolism here. She puts this scarlet cord out of her window, and that is symbolic of protection, of do not attack this household. So the other interesting thing here is Rahab, who is not an Israelite, is actually in the Messianic line. She saves these spies, and then she ends up in the Messianic line. It's interesting how God works all these things together and is able to use somebody like Rahab. Rahab was a prostitute, you remember. She wasn't godly. She was kind of out there. But when God brought her into the fold, saved her, she was able to dwell among the Israelites and then became, matriarch in the Messianic line. She was the mother of Boaz, who was the great-grandfather of King David. So it's interesting how the Lord just kind of works all of that out. So the spies return. They start talking to Joshua. And Joshua is now ready to cross the Jordan River. Prior to this, they are on the other side of the Jordan River, just waiting to see what the land was like in front of them. When the spies get back, they're ready to cross and actually begin this conflict. So the Lord tells Joshua, he says, "Tell the people, consecrate themselves, because tomorrow I am going to exalt you in their eyes." Remember, before this time, there really hasn't been any great sign for Joshua. You had Moses up there conferring leadership on him in front of the priests, in front of the people, but the Lord really hasn't done anything yet. Well, that's about to change. The Lord's going to do something great and miraculous in their eyes, so they know that the Lord is with Joshua. Kind of a, that next step confirmation of, yes, this is the man that I want in charge. So this is what the Lord said. He said, "And what I want you to do is get the priest and carry the Ark of the Covenant and walk out into the Jordan River." So that's what Joshua told him. He said, "All right, priest, grab the ark, walk out into the Jordan." Priests start walking out into the Jordan. As soon as their feet touch the water, the Jordan River backs up. It parts, just like the Red Sea. It's very, very symbolic of what Moses did. He raised his staff and the waters parted. The Lord did the same thing for Joshua here. He allowed the Jordan River to part and allowed the dry ground for the children of Israel to walk across. So what happened is the priests carry out the ark. They go out into the middle of the Jordan River, and they just stand there. The waters are parted, the ground is dry, the entire congregation of Israel marches across the Jordan River. And they marched across on dry ground. So, after everybody had crossed, the Lord tells Joshua, "All right, now what I want you to do is select 12 men, one from each of the tribes of Israel, and go back to where the priests are holding the ark, and I want you to pick up stones. One stone for each tribe. Pick up the stones that are at the feet of the priest. Take those over to where you're encamped, and then build an altar, or build a monument as a sign that says, 'The Lord did this for us.'" So, they did that, created this memorial, so that Israel would always remember, God had done this. It's very similar to what they did after they crossed the Red Sea. Again, they built a monument of stone so that Israelites would always remember the Lord had brought them out of Egypt. This is the Lord bringing them into the promised land. So, once they're across, now there's a second problem. Nobody's circumcised. You remember the law commanded that all male children should be circumcised after 8 days. When they're 8 days old, they get circumcised. Well, this wasn't practiced the entire time that they were wandering the desert. Now that they're actually in the promised land, they need to start following some of these things. So they reinstitute the practice of circumcision to come in line with the covenant of God. You remember that's part of the Abrahamic covenant. That was the sign, was circumcision. Now they need to get everybody circumcised. So Joshua says, everybody that's under 40 years old, you need to get circumcised. Because again, they've been wandering the desert for 40 years. Anybody that was, under the age of 20 had already been circumcised, but now you have 40 years of people that have not been. So anybody that's under the age of 40, they got circumcised. So they did that, waited for everybody to heal up, and then they were going to begin their campaign. Now, while they were encamped at Gilgal, which Gilgal, by the way, means circle of stones. The Bible says that God had said he had rolled away the reproach of them of Egypt from them. So that's why it was called Gilgal. But while they were encamped at Gilgal, remember, they're in the promised land now. I mean, they're out of the wilderness, they're out of the desert. Now they're in a land that's flowing with milk and honey. And it's not literal milk and honey, it just means there's an abundant supply of food here. I mean, you have fig trees and just all kinds of food that they are able to access. So it's why they're encamped in Gilgal. They actually, for the first time, eat of the produce of the land. And it says the day after they ate of the produce of the land, the manna from heaven ceased. Because there was no need for it anymore. You remember, God was providing for them while they were out wandering the desert. It says, that their clothes didn't wear out. They had plenty of food. God was providing for them the entire time. Now that they're actually in the land of that God had promised them, there was no need for that anymore. There was plenty of food for them there. So when they ate from that, ate from the land, the manna ceased. So from this point on, now they're just sustaining themselves on the land. So everybody's healed up now, and now they're ready to go after Jericho. Last part of chapter 5 kind of introduces us to that. Let's look at that. It's Joshua 5:13. Let's read that. It says, of course, this section here is the commander of the Lord's army. It says, when Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, are you for us, or are you for our adversaries? And he said, no, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped him, and said to him, what does my Lord say to his servant? And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you're standing is holy. And Joshua did so. Now that's interesting. A couple things here that we need to look at. Who was this person that Joshua was talking to? Now you remember, it's a very common occurrence in the Bible when an angel appears for the person to immediately fall down on the ground and worship, because angels have been in the presence of God. And when people see that, they are immediately reminded of their sin. talks about people seeing God, and they're ruined because they see the depth of their transgressions. So it's not uncommon for people to bow down and be worshiping angels. However, when that typically happens, what we see is the angel very quickly correcting that person, saying, "You do not worship me, you worship God. Get up. I am a servant just like you." That doesn't happen here. Some commentators will say, yes, this was just another angel, and that the worship that Joshua was giving was actually worship to God. But I don't think that's right, at least from my own perspective. I believe what we have here is what's called, and this is the technical term for it, it's called a pre-incarnate Christophany. That's a good seminary word for you. Pre-incarnate Christophany. This is a appearance of Christ in the Old Testament before his actual birth and life, several thousand years later, or at least 1,500 years later or so. What we see here is Christ in the Old Testament. We see that again, possibly another Christophany was in the fiery furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We see, there's a fourth person in the furnace that again is a pre-incarnate Christophany. So what we have here is possibly, God himself appearing to Joshua, because the angel doesn't correct Joshua. He doesn't say, "Don't worship me." He allows Joshua to go on ahead and bow down and to worship. So second thing that we see here is when Joshua asks him, what do you want me to do? The angel says, "Take off your sandals, for where you're standing is holy ground." Now this is very symbolic of what happened to Moses back on Mount Sinai, where there was a burning bush, and when he approached the burning bush, God told him, "Take off your shoes. This is holy ground." This is kind of symbolic of not bringing anything worldly into the presence of God. I mean, this is a whole and pure God that you're approaching. You're not to bring any of your impurities into the presence of God. So we have the angel of the Lord, or the Lord himself, standing there telling Joshua, "All right, let's go take over Jericho now." So we move forward to the next chapter, and we see the armies of Israel are now encamped in range of Jericho. Jericho understands they're going to get attacked. The walls are shut, and they are anticipating this attack by the Israelites. Now, historically, when we see a group of people trying to attack a walled city, what will happen is they will siege it. Basically, they'll encamp all the way around it and build a siege wall all the way around, and then basically not allow anybody in or out of the city. No trade, no food or anything. They'll kill everybody between their siege wall and the walls of the city. So basically, whatever's in the city stays in the city. Nothing gets out or comes in. And the idea is you basically starve out everybody in the city, and then once everybody is dead or dying, then you go in and attack. That's not what happened here. No, what happened here was far greater, because God was with Joshua. So what God told him to do was said, "I want you to take 7 priests and give them 7 horns, 7 trumpets. And I want them to march in front of the Ark of the Covenant. And then the army of Israel will march behind them. Every day for 6 days, march around the city of Jericho. Trumpets will be playing, but people, no one should say a thing." And the Lord didn't actually say that no one should say anything. Joshua commanded the people not to shout, not even to let a word leave their lips as they were doing this. So 6 days they were to march around. On the seventh day, well, I guess on the 6 days they were supposed to march around one time and then be done. I gotta wonder exactly what the people inside the walls of Jericho were thinking. They're thinking they're going to be under attack, maybe, arrows, people scaling the walls, or something. It's not what happened. You see these people marching around every day, one time, playing their trumpets, and then they're going back to camp, and that's all that happened. You gotta wonder what's going on in their minds. On that seventh day, however, entire army again was to march around Jericho, horns playing, and then on the seventh time around, they would stop, trumpets would blast, the people would let out a shout. And when that happened, the walls of Jericho fell down. Now, you remember that this is kind of interesting here, because the walls fell down and allowed the armies of Israel just to walk in. But there were houses along the wall. I mean, they were actually built into the wall. Rahab's house was one of them. So the entire walls of Jericho fell, which means, at least half of one side of a house wall was falling down. But yet Rahab and all of her family was safe inside their house. So God actually protected her little house. The walls fell around them, but her house was intact, and her little red cord was out the window. So God actually protected her to fulfill Joshua's, the spies of Joshua, their agreement with her. Now, Joshua, for his part, when he had heard the agreement that the spies had made with Rahab, he assigned those two same people to go back out to find Rahab and to bring her out. So, well, that's exactly what we see happen here. Is as soon as the walls fell, the armies of Israel rush in and they kill and destroy everybody in the city. The two spies go in, they find Rahab and her family, her father's household, all of her brothers and sisters and everybody, and they bring her out, and they set her up outside the Israelite camp. Now, you remember, they cannot go inside the camp yet because they're ceremonially unclean. Just like all the laws that we saw in Leviticus, where if you're unclean, the leprous people, for instance, they were supposed to go out of camp until they were the leprosy was either gone or they died or whatever, but they weren't allowed to be in camp because they were ceremonially unclean. So that's what happened with Rahab and her family. Was they got set out of camp for some period of time. Eventually, though, they were, of course, allowed to come into the camp and become a part of the society. It says in the book of Joshua that Rahab and Rahab lives in Israel to this day. Now, some commentaries say that dates the book of Joshua back to that time period. Others say, well, Rahab's household lives in Israel to this day. That's not really the point. The point is that she was allowed to live with the Israelites, even though she wasn't an Israelite. And again, because she was allowed to live with them, she actually became the mother of Boaz, who, of course, was in the Messianic line. So, now there's another interesting thing that happens here in the Battle of Jericho, because the Lord told them, before they ever went into attack, there are certain items that are under ban. Okay, the English Standard Version says under ban. Basically forbidden items that they weren't allowed to take. He said, destroy everything inside this city. Man, woman, child, everything. Burn everything to the ground. The only things that we're to keep, you can keep the gold, the silver, the bronze, and the iron, because you can't burn those. But all of that is to go into the treasury of the Lord. No one is to actually keep any spoils from this. Everything is the Lord's. This city is destroyed. Okay? So that's what Joshua had communicated to the army, was take nothing, destroy everything. Well, most people obeyed that, except for one man. His name was Achan. And that comes to cause problems here in the next section. Because what we have is, Israel is now going out and actively engaging the people that are inhabiting the promised land, and they're supposed to kill them. The Lord said, kill everybody there. Well, now we have a problem because the people of Israel, namely Achan, has defied what the Lord had said. So we go on to the next battle. It's the battle of Ai, or Aya. It depends how that's translated. It's spelled A-I. What happens here is the Lord is no longer with the armies of Israel. You remember, just a second ago, we talked about Jericho, about how the Lord had brought down the walls. I mean, the Lord is actually the one that is doing all this. I mean, Israelites basically just playing cleanup after the Lord. So what we have here is they get to the next city, the city of Ai. It has about 12,000 people in it. Again, Joshua sends spies up. Spies, investigate the city, and they come back and say, "Look, they're pretty weak. We can take these people. Not a big deal. Probably only 2,000 or 3,000 people, soldiers we should send up to go attack them." So Joshua's okay. Well, we'll send 2,000 or 3,000 people up. Israel sends their army up against the city, and their armies get repelled. They retreat. It says, and the Bible very specific about this, says that they lose 36 men in the retreat. Joshua is dumbfounded. He doesn't know what's going on. It says he puts on sackcloth, rips his clothes, prays to the Lord, and says, "Lord, what's going on? You taught me, or you told me that you'd be with us here, and now we're losing these battles. How are we ever supposed to proceed forward if you're not with us? What's going on?" The Lord, for his part, says, "Get up. You have broken your covenant with me, and that's why I wasn't with you." And he tells Joshua that somebody has taken one of the items that were under ban, one of those forbidden items from Jericho, and that's why the Lord wasn't with them. And the Lord tells Joshua, he says, "I want you to go out the next day, and by lots, I will basically direct you to the tribe, the family, and then eventually the person that is responsible for what's going on." So he goes out the next day. Actually, the Lord tells the people that they should consecrate themselves because this event's going to happen. Joshua goes out the next day, and again they go down the line, find the tribe of Judah and the family of Achan, and eventually they come to Achan himself, and it's like, "Why did you do this?" he insists. And then Achan confesses. He said, "I went in there, I saw this beautiful mantle from I think Shinar. I took it. There was 200 shekels of silver. I took that. A gold that was weight of 50 shekels. I took that as well. You'll find them in my tent. I buried them in the ground. I'm sorry." So they went into Achan's tent. They found the items that were under ban. They brought them out, dumped them all out, and then they proceeded to stone and burn. It says they did this to Achan, his spoils, all of his belongings, and his family were all stoned and burned for their sins against God. God doesn't tolerate in the Old Testament any deviation from his plan. If he gives a covenant, he keeps his side. And it's up to the people to keep their side. When they break the covenant, now God demands some type of judgment against them. And that was the judgment against Achan, was him and his entire family were executed. So the next thing we see here is now they have to actually go destroy the city of Ai, or city of A. So the Lord tells Joshua, "Okay, this is how you're going to do it. you're going to send one group of men up the front and draw out the armies. And that's what they did. They sent a group of men up. They started attacking the city. The city's army, gathers, and then Israel's army pulls back. And it says the entire fighting force of the city pursued Israel. So they left the city and then went to attack Israel. Except there was a second group of Israelites that were ready to attack. As soon as the army left the city, the second group of Israelites attacked the city, got inside, slaughtered everybody inside, and started burning it down. It says the armies of A turn around and look, see their city being destroyed. And then Joshua, the Lord tells Joshua, hold out your javelin. Actually, let's read that here. It's Joshua 8:18. I have that marked. Just about skipped over that little section there. It's much better to read it from the Bible than to give my recount of it. But let's see here. Joshua 8:18 says, Then the Lord said to Joshua, Stretch out the javelin that is in your hand toward A, for I will give it to you. For I will give it into your hand. And Joshua stretched out the javelin that was in his hand toward the city. And the men in the ambush rose quickly out of their place, and as soon as he had stretched out his hand, they ran and entered the city and captured it. And they hurried to set the city on fire. It talks about the men of A looking back, seeing their city being destroyed, and then the armies of Israel stop the retreat, turn around, and destroy that army. It says Joshua did not lower his javelin until everything was destroyed. So kind of reminds me back of when Moses had raised his the staff of the Lord as Joshua was fighting down, and as long as Moses had his staff raised, Joshua's army was winning. Very similar here. Joshua held out his javelin and didn't lower it until the battle was over. So A was destroyed, and again the Lord was with them and had allowed them to have victory here. So that sets up our next section here, because what we see is Israel is now being very aggressive. They're going into these different cities and they are utterly destroying them. And the neighboring kingdoms are seeing this. They're very afraid of Israel because they understand that their God is with them and no one's been able to stand in their path. So now we have a group of people that are very, very sly. They understand that there's no way that they're going to be able to stand against Israel. Israel has their eye on them next, and that they will soon be destroyed. So they decide that they need to have some type of peace treaty with Israel. So let's look at Joshua 9:4. Let's see what they do to get around this here. 9:4. It says, They on their part acted with cunning, and went and made ready provisions, and took worn sacks for their donkeys, and wineskins worn out, and torn, and mended, with worn out patched sandals on their feet, and worn out clothes. All of their provisions were dry and crumbling. Okay. So this is part of their deceit here. They took all of this old, worn out, moldy stuff with them. So when they came to Joshua, it would kind of reinforce their story. Their story was that they were from a very far away land, and that they had heard that Joshua was coming through, and that they wanted to have a peace treaty with Israel. They knew that God had given the promised land to Israel, that the entire land there was going to be Israel's. But since they weren't a part of that land, they were outside of it. They wanted to be, have a peace treaty with Israel. And of course, Joshua, he looks at him, he looks at all their equipment, sees how it's all worn and torn up and patched, and the Gibeonites go on to say, when we left, all of this stuff was new. The bread was freshly baked, all of our clothes were new, all these wine sacks were new and filled with new wine, and look at all this stuff that we have here. It's old, it's cracked, it's falling apart. So Joshua looks at him and is like, okay, well, I believe that you're from this faraway land. Let's make a peace treaty with them. And ends up swearing before the Lord that he will not kill them and their people. Of course, that's not what he should have done. You remember, Lord told them when they got into the Promised Land that they were to kill everybody that they had encountered. That the land was theirs, that they were to kill everybody. And this was probably the main reason for that, was so that none of the foreign gods, none of their idolatrous practices or anything would affect the children of Israel. They were to go in, kill everybody, so that they would have a fresh start and serve only God. They didn't want any, God didn't want any of that outside influence there. So Joshua, thinking that he was acting prudently, said, okay, I'll make this peace treaty with you, and we're not attack you, and we'll be friends. Problem is that Joshua didn't consult the Lord on this, and that's where he got into problems, because the Lord told him, you're to kill everybody. Well, the Lord probably would have told him that the Gibeonites were being deceitful. Joshua never thought to consult the Lord, though. So it says after 3 days, they go out and are looking at the surrounding cities about what to attack next, and they find they're the Gibeonites 3 days away. And they go in there and say, you said you were from this faraway country. Here you are, though. You're in our path. We have to destroy you. Of course, they can't do that because they had already sworn by God that they would not attack them, that they would not kill them, that they would in fact let them live. So Joshua is very angry with them. He says he curses them. Let's go look at Joshua 9:24 and 25. And it says, they answered Joshua, because it was told to your servants for a certainty that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land before you, so we feared greatly for our lives because of you, and did this thing. And now behold, we are in your hand. Whatever seems good and right in your sight, do to us. So what we see here is that the Gibeonites are well aware of, that God had given the land to the Israelites, just like the people of Jericho, just like Rahab, was aware that God had given the land to the Israelites and that they were going to be destroyed. Gibeonites knew the same thing. So they shrewdly made this agreement. They basically tricked Joshua into making this agreement. Of course, now that Joshua has sworn before God to let them live, now he has to let them live. So Joshua, he ends up cursing them as slaves, says, okay, because you did this wicked thing, you will never cease to be slaves. It says you'll chop the wood, you'll gather the water, you will be our slaves from now on. Of course, now we see the repercussions of this. Up and until this time, children of Israel have been moving through here. They killed Jericho, or destroyed Jericho, by itself. It was a city by itself. They killed it. The city of A, same way. They went up there. It was just one city, one king. They destroyed that as well. Now they've made an agreement with, or it's this peace treaty, this covenant with the Gibeonites. And now we see some repercussions coming from this. You remember, God told the Israelites not to make any treaties or anything, to just go in there and kill all the inhabitants. Now that they've made a treaty, now we see some things coming back here, because there are 5 kings. Says the king of Jerusalem actually saw that this treaty with the Gibeonites had been established, and now he was very afraid. It says the city of the Gibeonites was one of the royal cities. It was very massive. Had a very mighty army, and now that they were, had a treaty with Israel, now that they were basically too much to handle. So the king of Jerusalem ends up gathering together 4 other kings to coordinate an attack against the Gibeonites. Of course, they do that. Gibeon immediately sends word to Joshua and says, help us out here. We are your servants. It says, do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us, for all the kings of the Amorites that live in the hill country have assembled against us. So now we have Israel actually fighting for a non-godly country, which is not what God had intended at all. But now Israel is in this covenant with them. Now Israel has to come to the defense of Gibeon. And, of course, they do. And the Lord is still with Joshua. It says they marched an entire, all night to get there, to the defense of Gibeon. And God says, don't worry, I will give them into your hands. So when they get there, it says the Lord confounded the armies of the Amorites. There was a bunch of confusion. Said many people were slain with the swords. Whether they slayed themselves or whether the Israelites slayed them, not really clear. I think the reading is more of this was all what God did. So God went down there and he destroyed many of the people, and then the armies of the Amorites started to retreat. And as they were retreating, it says the Lord sent large hailstones to smash into their armies. And that the hailstones themselves killed more than all of what the armies of Israel killed with their swords. So the Lord was actively pursuing this army and destroying them. And this next part here it's actually pretty interesting here. Let's look at Joshua 10:12, because this is one of the things that one of the stories you'll hear about in the Old Testament. It's hard to kind of put that into the context where this happened sometimes, but that's why we're looking at the great story. So right here, Joshua 10:12 says, at that time Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the sons of Israel, and he said in the sight of Israel, sun, stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still and the moon stopped, until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? The sun stopped in the midst of the heaven, and did not hurry to set for about a whole day. So this is one of the miraculous things that happened in the Bible. It said the sun stood still in the sky for a whole day, while they were pursuing the enemies of Israel. They were pursuing the Amorites. The sun didn't set until they had taken their vengeance on the Amorite army. So, to end that section there, it says further, Joshua pursued these kings all the way to a cave in Makkedah. The kings had gathered themselves and hidden themselves in this cave, and Joshua found them there, brings the kings out of the cave, says he puts them on the ground, puts his foot on their necks, and then he executes them because they attacked him. So this is one of the stories that you'll hear just a lot about in the Bible, where the sun actually stood still in the sky. This is where Joshua asked the Lord for this miracle, and the Lord provided. Allowed the sun to stay in the sky until the entire armies of the Amorites were destroyed. So, those were some of the battles that were discussed here. Later on, after this, after the 10th chapter here, this is where it goes in and it starts discussing about this this group of people were settled in this land, this group of people were settled in this land. Talks about some of their, a little bit of their internal conflicts there. We're not going to really cover that. What we're going to do is we're going to jump ahead to Joshua 24, 14 through 18. This is where Joshua is kind of addressing the people and letting them know that they serve God, and God will bless them as long as they do that. So let's look at Joshua 24, 14 through 18. This is another one of those verses that you'll see quoted a lot in the Bible, or quoted a lot from the Bible. And this is the context that it comes in. It says, "Now therefore fear the Lord, and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in the land that you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Then the people answered, "Far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For it is the Lord our God who brought us and our fathers up from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, and who did those great signs in our sight and preserved us in all the way that we went, and among all the peoples through whom we passed. And the Lord drove out before us the peoples, the Amorites, who lived in the land. Therefore we will serve the Lord, for he is our God." Of course, we see here again where Israel is gathered together, just like what they did with Moses, when Moses said, "Turn away from the other gods, serve the Lord, follow his covenants." Again, we see here the people doing the same thing. They're saying, we're not going to serve any other gods. We're going to serve the Lord. We saw all of the miracles that he did for us. The Lord is our God. We will serve him. Again, they're making this covenant here, saying that they're going to follow the law, that God is their God, that they're not going to serve any other gods. And for their part, it says that the people of Israel followed the Lord all the days of Joshua's life. That they did what was right in his eyes, that they followed the law, that they were good in the sight of the Lord. Of course, as we see going on through Jewish history, they fell away from serving the Lord, got into idolatry. That's where we see the northern kingdom falling, eventually Judah, the captivity down to Babylon. We see all these things happening when the people are falling away from the Lord. But at least here, they're saying, we will serve the Lord. Joshua died at the age of 110, which is really good. You figure he was roaming the desert for 40 years, had a very hard life, was a general leading the armies of Israel, and he lived for 110 years. So, good life. A lot of good things happened for Joshua and for the people of Israel here. Israel goes on to conquer more kingdoms, more cities in that the region, and is able to settle down into the promised land. So the lesson that we learn here, it basically reinforces the lessons that we have learned all along here. All these stories are speaking of trust, about how when we trust God, things work out. God doesn't always give us, the Bible doesn't teach. Well, I'll tell you what the Bible doesn't teach. The Bible doesn't teach the health and wealth gospel. It's not, if you serve God, you'll be rich and you'll never be sick, and you'll have all of these material wealth. That is not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches about, serving the Lord, and he provides for all your needs, and that you store up all your treasures in heaven. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. We see the people trusting in the Lord, and He's providing for their needs. When the Israelites don't think that they can, militarily conquer a certain people, it doesn't matter. God does it for them. It's all a matter of trusting in God here. All through what we've studied thus far, it's been this constant reoccurring theme of trust God. When you trust God, God provides. When you don't trust God, God judges. Now, we don't have a lot of the judgments going on today that we obviously see in the Old Testament because we live under grace, but the same principles apply. You trust in God, and God will provide for all of your needs. He sees, when you're hungry, and He provides for that. He sees you need clothing. He provides for that. He provides for your needs. He doesn't give you material wealth that's unimportant in the eyes of the Lord. What is important is the state of your soul and how what your relationship with God actually is. Those are the important things. So keep that in mind as we go forward, because I'm certain that this theme will come back around countless times. So that's the end of our story this week. Next week, I'm not certain exactly when I'm going to be able to do this. I will be traveling next week, so hopefully I'll be able to put something together and won't have to do two in the following week. But anyhow, thank you for joining us today. I hope you've learned something, and I hope you join us back here next time. So until then, God bless you all. Keep studying, keep praying, and join us back here next time.